According to the modern Indian historian Radha Mukherji, Alexander's military expedition into India was no doubt highly creditable, but cannot be regarded as a brilliant military achievement, as he had never been brought face to face with any of the great nations of Hindustan.
Wait a minute, how does that make it not a great achievement? Because he's never actually met them, just invaded the outsides of their territory?
He didn't actually fight any of the major nations of India.
Okay. He used the correct one. Okay, thank you.
A.K. Narayan argues that Alexander's conquests in India were not great triumphs of the Greeks over their barbarian enemies and the bringing of civilization to the subcontinent. Instead, Alexander's invasion of India was a minor military expedition whose consequences were little more than a few short-lived kingdoms that lasted for roughly 2 centuries before the Yuezhi destroyed the last of these realms, and the Yavanas were absorbed into the surrounding peoples of India, leaving nothing to history except for a few coins and inscriptions. Meanwhile, Tarn agrees that Alexander's Indian expedition was an insignificant part of India's history. Tarn writes that almost everything Alexander did in India was wiped off the map within 7 years of his death. The last Macedonian satrap, Phaethon, quitted Gandhara in 316 BCE. Chandragupta Maurya successfully conquered all of Alexander's remaining territories in India and incorporated them into the Mauryan Empire.
You look like a who?
What kind? Seuss?
Your hair is like this. You look like one of the who's out of Whoville.
I am.
It's cute.
Thus, Tarn reasserts his initial point that the Yavana kingdoms cannot truly be considered to be part of Indian history. Rather, they must be considered as the 5th Hellenistic dynasty. Furthermore, most surviving sources from the classical age itself do not suggest that Alexander's expedition into India was a grand military triumph for the famous conqueror.
Yeah?
Both Arrian in his Anabasis Alexandria and Plutarch in his Life of Alexander explained that Alexander chose to leave India because his army became tired and weary. I can just say tired and weary.
Just say that works there.
Tired and weary.
Works. Tired and weary.
Of war after many months of fighting with unknown tribes in a strange land, and eventually Antestisan Iskuros I actually put a chi where Xi should go. Droi Piatstamani Manoi Kaiton Gangain Parasai Potamon. Translation?
Yes.
The soldiers strongly stood against the constraining Alexander when he sought to cross the Ganges River. I typed the Greek in the main body, and
Excellent.
I was so embarrassed when I saw that I had a chi in place of a Alejandro. Therefore, both Arrian and Plutarch agree that Alexander's campaign was undone through his own arrogance and choice to ignore his soldiers' needs. Needs. Food, water. However, However, while the folly and hubris
ran into a lumpy part. I always run into lumpy parts, like making pancakes.
of Alexander's invasion of India seems to have been very obvious to historians of later times. It was probably not apparent to Seleucus I when he became king over his own dominions.
Okay.
According to Meredith L. Runyon, the Mauryan dynasty in India engaged in a crucial conflict with the Seleucids.
I'm sorry, but the Lucas dude definitely sounds like that. Yeah? Yes?
Not long after Alexander's death. I just realized I should probably put it with. I'm breaking to put in the exact date when they were fighting.
Good, yeah, that's a good idea. Well, it sounds better. You feel more confident?
Yep.
Lots more confident.
Would you say it sounds better than my previous?
It does to me. It sounds more sure.
So it's better. Plus, I like the fact that I'm reading it aloud to you.
I know, I'm enjoying it. I'm buying myself a fucking iron. Go ahead.
In 305 BCE. Probably due to factors such as the distance between Syria and India. You know the city called Antioch in Syria?
Yes.
That's where the Seleucid capital was. And Seleucus suffered what Runyon describes as a completely devastating battle and almost utter defeat during the war with Chandragupta Maurya. In the aftermath of the Mauryan victory, Seleucus I signed what Paul Cosman refers to as the Treaty of the Indus, in which the Seleucid king relinquished his claim to Alexander's Indian territories. After this peace treaty was negotiated, the Seleucid Empire does not seem to have attempted to reconquer its lost Indian provinces in the years following Seleucus I's death. Even though the Seleucids still fought frequent wars with the Parthian Empire, and Antiochus III the Great besieged Euthydemus I, to the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, for 3 years in an attempt to reincorporate Bactria into the Seleucid Empire. Instead of attempting to reconquer their lost Indian territories from the Mauryan Empire, the Seleucid Empire chose to send ambassadors to the Mauryan royal court in Pataliputra. Indeed, it was one of those ambassadors, a man named Megasthenes, who wrote the original Indica, i.e. the now-lost first Greek language book ever written as a description of India. Thus, the Seleucids chose to abandon war and conflict with India, and instead develop diplomatic ties with the Mauryans. Therefore, while Alexander's plans of conquest had failed to bring India under Greek control, the Seleucids managed to establish a peaceful relationship between Hellenistic and Indian cultures that may have lasted until the fall of the Mauryan Empire to the Shunga dynasty. Ultimately, Alexander the Great's invasion of the northwestern Indian subcontinent was paltry and insignificant to India's history, and a more substantial and lasting connection between Greek and Indian cultures was forged through the peaceful policies of his successors rather than through Alexander's own attempts at military conquest. Meanwhile, the archaeological and cultural record seems to indicate. I caught another run-on sentence and truncated it.
Excellent.
That, for the most part, that's too that these conquests left I should get rid of for the most part. That's too jokey. That these conquests left no substantial impact on any region of the Indian subcontinent outside of what is now Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the Punjab. Almost no material evidence surviving related to Alexander has been discovered in these regions, not even coins bearing his image. Arrian does not record. Finally, I'm under 12,000 words again. Arrian does not record Alexander giving King Ambi of Taxila anything in exchange for the gifts that the Indian kings gave to him. This indicates that Alexander was only interested in the military conquest of India. He does not seem to have attempted to establish trade relations with ships with native Indian societies, seeing the subcontinent as merely another region to be conquered. In contrast, Plutarch writes in his account of Alexander's Indian expedition that Epe de ton indon hoi I'm not going to try to read the Greek. It's because I'm terrible at reading Greek. Because then the most warlike of the Indians were the wayjourners/mercenaries who are frequent visitors to wars. And Plutarch's use of this word, mistoporuntes, wayjourners, to describe these Indian soldiers suggests that unlike Alexander himself, his native Indian opponents paid their armies with money and rewards. Meanwhile, Alexander's only significant ally in India, Porus, have won a man named Porus. Alexander gave Porus Alexander, according to Arrian, Alexander delivered the whole country as far as the Hephaestus River. The Hephaestus River to be ruled by Porus. However, it seems that Alexander's friendship with Porus did not prevent a Punjabi king named Parvartika, whom Narayan suggests might have been the same as Porus, from allying himself with the Mauryan Empire. The reason why this was able to happen, disregarding the question of whether or not Parvartika and Porus were the same king, is because Alexander gave control of all his Indian territories to a single ruler, rather than make alliances with many different local monarchs or adopt aspects of Indian culture. So when that single Indian ruler chose to secede from the Macedonian Empire, he caused the Seleucid Empire to lose all of its potential Indian satrapies. It's a province. I should explain. A satrap was a provincial governor in the Persian Empire. Therefore, it's very safe to say that the Greeks losing control of their former territories in India is mostly the fault of Alexander the Great's bad decisions in this particular region. In conclusion, none of the three authors who are discussed in this section, 4 including Plutarch. None of the authors who are discussed in this section discussed in this section regard Alexander the Great's campaign in India as a particularly great moment of his conquest. Both A.K. Narayan and R.K. Mukherji consider what victories Alexander did achieve while he was in India to be indecisive. Meanwhile, Tarn comments on how Alexander's conquests in India were so tenuous that Chandragupta Maurya was able to reclaim all of the territory that the Greeks ruled in India a mere 7 years after Alexander's death in 323 BCE. The main reason why Alexander's conquest in India failed to endure for long after his death is because he did not establish strong economic relationships with local Indian rulers, choosing instead to march through the subcontinent while waging war on every tribe and city he met. As a result of Alexander's failure to integrate Greek and Indian culture, the Greco-Bactrian culture began in a weak, uncertain position, and the Greeks had no significant Indian allies. Thus, Alexander's attempted military conquest of India was not only a failure in the immediate sense, but it also left the Greco-Bactrians without any major allies in the Indian subcontinent.
Without what in the Indian subcontinent?
I should just in a weak position.
Okay.
I don't want to repeat I just caught some repetition. This will be a major factor in the early development of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom.